Now, talks between the United States and Ukraine have gotten underway in the Saudi Arabian city of Jeddah. The face-to-face discussions come less than 2 weeks after Vladimir Zelensky's disastrous visit to the White House. It resulted in the Trump administration suspending military aid and even halting intelligence sharing with Kyiv. Zelensky did, however, reach out to the U.S. president, saying he regretted the incident, and today we have both sides now sitting down for those talks on how to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. The U.S. Secretary of State said the meeting would be important to gauge to see if Kyiv is willing to make concessions for peace. We can now bring in Patrick Berry, Senior Associate Professor in Warfare and Counter-terrorism at the University of Bath, and he's former British Army captain and NATO analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Now, it seemed that Ukraine was in a weaker position following that White House meeting, but with this overnight drone attack, it seems that Ukraine is eager to demonstrate it's still got some tricks up its sleeve. What do you make of what we saw overnight?
Good afternoon. I think one way to think about this is round 12 of a heavyweight boxing match, and both of the fighters have been slugging it out for a long time. They're exhausted, but they know if they can get some points in the last round, they have a better chance of getting a victory on points, as it were. So that's the way I see it. You've seen the Russians really pushing in Kursk and trying to split that salient where the Ukrainians are holding out. The Ukrainians really keen to hold on to it and maybe trade it for the Zaporizhia power plant, which the Russians hold in any negotiations. You've got the Russians really turning up the pressure and targeting Kyiv recently, and then the Ukrainians landing another blow. So it's all eyes on what this deal is going to be, both demonstrating they've still got some fight and reach left.
Typically we've seen this war now go on for over 3 years now, and during the winter months there seems to be the conflict usually is frozen, yet today we have Russia claiming to have taken 12 settlements around Kursk.
Yeah, absolutely. The Russians have made basically a surprise attack, as far as I understand, through some pipelines, underground pipelines, and managed to come out behind the Ukrainians using deception. They made their forces look like the Ukrainians, and it's taken them by surprise. In a part of the area, it doesn't mean all of it's going to fall, but it does look like they've managed to split the salient. So, yeah, as I said, both sides are going for it. I mean, in terms of the winter fighting, it's been unseasonably or unusually mild winter. And that means the ground hasn't frozen in many places, which means it's more difficult to maneuver, especially in terms of armored vehicles, etc. And secondly, because the drones are so good at surveilling the battlefield, there's much more transparency when the leaves and the foliage are dead during winter. So again, that's another reason why things have slowed down a bit. So there's multiple reasons why this winter, has gone as it did. The Russian attack, they've lost a bit of momentum generally across the Donbass. And I think so far the Ukrainians are relatively positive about their position, given where it could have been, for example, in November when it looked like the Russians were going to maintain momentum. It's essentially dropped off, apart from in some places.
Patrick, we saw that in the aftermath of that meeting in the Oval Office between Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump, that the United States not only halted military aid to Ukraine, but they also stopped sharing intelligence. Just for our viewers and for myself, really, if the U.S. stopped sharing intelligence, what kind of information are they not sharing with Ukraine?
So as far as we know, what was stopped was intelligence that would provide basically target acquisition for Russian forces inside Russia. That is what the US sources that I've seen, open source, have said as being. So anything that would warn the Ukrainians about incoming Russian strikes, that has continued, according to the US. And I don't know about that because we actually saw some successful strikes by the Russians, which I just mentioned. But that's what the US are saying. So basically what they're trying to do is turn down the temperature by providing no intelligence on force, locations inside Russia. Now, obviously, that has given the border, where the fighting is, that has pretty drastic consequences for Ukraine's defensive posture too. So, but apparently that's what the main stock of intelligence has been about.
And obviously, the British and the French said they would step up in sharing their intelligence to Ukraine. Do the Brits and the French have the same amount of intelligence as the United States?
No, in a word, as different. Sometimes they have, like in terms of obviously the UK is part of the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes would have specialisation. So the US has basically one of the largest, obviously, capacities of intelligence in the world, probably the largest, obviously. But so the UK would have specialised in some other areas too. But they do have basically ISTAR platforms in terms of airborne surveillance, planes, etc. So do the French. And they can be used to certainly assess and help fill some of the gaps that would have been left by the US cessation of intelligence. We'll just have to wait and see, because I think, this talk in Jeddah and what's happening is really interesting. We've seen Ukraine basically being cajoled into accepting they're going to have to make concessions, and Russia really not mentioning any, and neither the US mentioning any that Russia will have to make. I think there's probably, to get to this point, there's been some private pledges from probably Vladimir Putin to Trump saying, yes, I would be willing to concede that, but I can't say it now. You remember that in Vladimir Putin's Russia, a sign of weakness, a sign of concession is not something that goes down well. He'll be looking to manage this and manage the optics of any deal and sell it to his population as a win. Hence why I think we're seeing less of the concessions about what Russia will make coming out into the press at the moment, at least.
Patrick, we do have a meeting that's taking place in Paris with military chiefs from around 30 European and NATO states, as well as countries including Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. This is, of course, for that coalition of what potentially could be part of a future settlement deal if we have it. What do you think would be palatable for the Russians, given that they don't want Ukraine to join NATO or have NATO troops stationed on the ground in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's really difficult to say, isn't it? Because the Russian line is basically no European peacekeepers. And so, and it's a pretty hard line, so we'll have to see. I mean, can it be dressed up? Can European peacekeepers be dressed up as non-NATO? Who knows? There's also this part about a sort of who's going to blink first, as Prime Minister Keir Starmer said, between Europe looking for security guarantees and the US looking for Europe to step up before it gives any security guarantees to whatever force it would be. I think, my hunch would be, and again, just remember, it'll basically turn on how ardent Russia is about this, but my hunch is some sort of European force west of the Dnipro River, which is, 2/3 across Ukraine, may make sense. So it's there as a reaction force. It could move forward if the Russians tried to break through lines again, but it's nowhere near really the Russian area in the Donbass, etc. Something like that may work, but who knows? We'll just have to wait and see.
Patrick Berry, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.